It's hard to talk about a game like Minit without spoiling the fun it has to offer. It's a short game, only about an hour or two long, and much of the appeal comes from exploration and puzzle solving. So, taking a cue from the game, I'm going to spend the next minute giving my spoiler-free review of Minit. Minit is what you get when you take Majora's Mask's time loop concept, but you put it in the style of a 2D Zelda game and give it a Downwell-esque art style. You play as the small duck creature who finds a cursed sword that forces him to live in 60-second cycles of time. When the time hits 0, he dies and starts back at his house. Your objective is to stop the curse by exploring the surrounding area, solving puzzles and obtaining items as you go. Despite the time loop, each bit of progress you make is permanent and opens up a whole new set of areas. You even find different houses to claim as your own along the way. Also, the writing is superb. It's a fun little romp and you should go pick it up. Turns out 60 seconds is a lot longer than you think it is. I didn't think I'd be able to finish saying all of that in time. But that's part of the genius of Minit. You think you have enough time, but then suddenly you look at the... It's hard to talk about a game like Minit without spoiling the fun it has to offer. No, stop. I'm not going to be that guy. That being said, there truly isn't much I can say about Minit that won't reduce the experience in my opinion. I'm a guy who tends to not care about spoilers, but when so much of the enjoyment of this game comes from bit-by-bit puzzle solving, I think it's safe to say that it's better to go into this one as blind as you can. It's short, but it also has a decent amount of optional content that makes it more than worth the $10 price tag in my opinion. This video is about to go way more in depth, so click away if you're worried about spoiling yourself. If I had to describe Minit with 3 words, I would use cozy, tight, and clever. Cozy because the setting is made up of these tiny screens that cluster together in a comfortable and cohesive way. Areas feel distinct and memorable even though it's all rendered in black and white. This is the first non-linear game in a while I feel more comfortable labeling a sandbox than an open world, because it's fully traversable in a matter of seconds. The houses that act as your respawn points are strategically placed, allowing enough wiggle room for more exploration, while still being centralized enough to complement the Metroidvania-esque shortcutting and gear-based progression. I say Minit is tight because its simple mechanics never fall apart despite the breakneck pace the game forces them to conform to. Most items you find on your journey remain useful all the way to the end. Every puzzle had me spending 1 or 2 cycles thinking up a solution, and a few cycles after following through with my plan. Whenever I started to feel like I was hitting a roadblock, I found that poking around just a little bit off to the side would spark a chain of revelations in my mind that would get me going to where I needed to go. That's good game design if I've ever seen it. Making these constant, tiny steps of progress through dozens of time loops is satisfying as hell. And finally, I say it's clever because goddamn was I constantly impressed. I'm not just talking about the sharp writing either. It takes the 60-second conceit and plays with it in all the fun ways you'd want it to. For example, there's this old guy by the lighthouse who takes forever to talk and this quicksand that you need to slowly inch your way through. It does a great job signposting the problems players need to solve next, and it does an even better job juggling multiple of them at once. It's just good, plain and simple. Going into a game like Minit, there's always a concern in my heart that the unique premise will end up just being a shallow gimmick at the end of the day. Thankfully, the game did not sacrifice content in favor of its atypical form. While the simplistic combat and puzzle design might not appeal to everyone, I think it's important to contextualize these pieces as part of a greater whole. There's not much room for complexity when we're talking about obstacles that literally need to be solved within seconds. Truly, the time limit itself is half the battle here. The satisfaction of moving forward is heightened by the strict schedule you must conform to. As I got further into the game, I started to appreciate how much Minit values efficiency. Like how you have a suicide button that lets you respawn without waiting for the timer to hit 0. It's useful because you often find yourself solving puzzles with 15 or 20 seconds left to spare in your cycle, and forcing players to have to wait out all that time with nothing to do would have been obnoxious. This is a smart design decision and keeps the player's focus and flow going at all times. As soon as I realized everything would have to be within 60 seconds of your starting location, I started to worry about the size of the game's world. Then, I found the second home, dramatically increasing the size of the game. And then soon after, just as I started to feel that traveling between homes in 60-second spans was getting annoying, the game introduced a warp area that resolved my concerns entirely. At any given point in Minit, I felt as if the developers were 3 steps ahead of me. Everything about the journey felt like a masterfully handcrafted Rube Goldberg machine. It was to the point that it actually started to weird me out a little. Part of this is due to the strong visual design of the game. You only have so much time to parse out what's going on each screen, but the clean sprite work guarantees that the interactive components of each area are clear and intuitive. The game does a fantastic job of encouraging you to poke at anything that seems fishy, and more often than not, you'll stumble upon something. At the end of the day, that's what Minit does best, rewarding curiosity. Even if your exploration doesn't end up with you finding a new item or area, you'll probably find a coin or permanent health upgrade. Even after my first playthrough, there was still plenty of mysteries I spent hours trying to solve on my second. The game seems a little too simple and short at first glance, but they packed in a boatload of secrets, and you'll miss out on a lot of it if you only played this game once. Like this sewer area, which I missed entirely my first time through. I also missed this hidden entrance that takes you to the final area of the game. I didn't have any idea what you could do with this bone in the graveyard either, but I felt really stupid once I realized what you need to use it for. And I'm not gonna spoil what the deal is with this northern room in the secret temple, but once you figure this one out, it'll blow your goddamn mind. There's a lot going on in this game. And hey, if you ever get stuck and need a bit of a hand, there's an optional hint system you can activate by going to this haunted mansion in the north. It'll scatter ghosts throughout the world, each one giving you a riddle guiding you towards a different secret. I love this ghost thing a lot. For players that don't want any help whatsoever, they don't ever need to utilize them, and even if they were to accidentally turn the ghosts on, you can deactivate them easily. But for the players like me that do want hints, the riddles do an excellent job of pointing you in the right direction but never spoiling the fun for you. Well, except for this one, but it made me laugh, so I'll let it slide. I also love that the ghosts can't all be found in one location. You actively need to travel throughout the world to find them, and the hints they give you might not even be relevant to the part of the world you're even in. And if you need even more help, the ghosts are easily accessible on Twitter too. Good stuff. If you're not satisfied after your first playthrough, fear not, because you have a second quest to worry about. As you might expect from the 8-bit era, this is less of a New Game Plus mode and more of a hard mode. I actually recommend that you do a 100% completion run of the first quest before starting this one, because you're gonna want the knowledge that comes with it. In the second quest, your regular sword is replaced by a broken one that has less range and damage. You can only take one hit before dying, and the only way to bump that up to 2 hits is by finding every health upgrade in the game. Puzzles are modified to be a bit trickier. This tree is taller. But most brutal of all, your timer is reduced to 40 seconds. The reduced timer means that the second quest is all about optimizing your routing and movement skills. It's common to solve a puzzle or grab an item with 1 second left on the clock. In fact, the running shoes, which was more of a fun bonus item in the first quest, becomes a necessity this time around. The only way to get the shoes is by getting 9 of the 16 collectible coins in the game, so players who didn't bother with them during the first quest will need to pick up the slack. Some things seem all but impossible at first, but after cutting enough corners and learning how to maximize your running, you'll be surprised by what you can accomplish in 40 seconds. Which leads me to my next point. This game seems like a speedrunner's wet dream. I'm sure they're gonna have a field day with this one once they figure out what to do with it. I've always looked at the speedrunning community from a distance, watching a stream or video here or there, but Minit has me reconsidering. Unintentionally or not, this game seems like the perfect introduction to that style of gaming, or at least getting you to appreciate and understand the mindset of those who play that way. If you want something to chill out and relax to, maybe a bit more slow-paced, you'll be happy to learn that you unlock a timerless mode after beating the second quest with 100% completion. And while I do think it's a fun final reward for the player, it did have me reflecting a bit on the game's flaws. This third mode, where you play as Mary the Hint Ghost, is practically the same as the standard game but without the timer. I probably shouldn't have expected too much, but part of me wanted a bit more. I think there's a bit of a missed opportunity here, especially with you playing as a whole new character. Like, being able to fly over water you would otherwise need the flippers for or something, or even just letting me survive in polluted water because I'm a ghost. I don't know. I thought it was cute, but maybe fell just a little bit flat for me. And on that note, I don't think that the second quest is necessarily perfect either. Now, I did enjoy it overall, but some of the additional challenge isn't always implemented well. For example, putting enemies in the mine area does make running through it a bit more interesting, sure, but you can tell that they were never intended to be there in the first place. It's easy to run into these enemies because of how well they blend into the environment, but no other area in the game is like this. More specifically, this is the one point in the game where I feel like there's too much visual clutter between the detailed background art and the enemy sprites on top of it. Then there's other, admittedly minor things, like the man who needs water being placed further south than he was in the first quest. This doesn't make the puzzle any more interesting, it just means I have to spend a little bit more time moving in one direction. On the other hand, I also think it's weird how some things are practically unchanged between the 3 modes. These collectible tentacles, for example, are in the same locations every time. It would have been nice to change their location for each quest. If it isn't obvious, I want to clarify that none of these complaints were ever a point of frustration for me, just some minor annoyances and missed opportunities that I think are only fair to point out. However, I do think the game dropped the ball in one place that I really wish it wouldn't have, and sadly it's the final boss. At the end of the game, you reach a factory producing cursed swords similar to the one you have. At first, you have to solve 2 simple yet fun puzzles to stop the supply lines feeding into the machine. Then, you stick your sword in a gear to the south. Finally, you have to make your way from one of your homes back to the gear with a watering can to make it short-circuit. This is the only point since the beginning of the game where you're forced to go swordless, and while it doesn't last all that long, it's one of my favorite moments in Minit. Losing your one tool that you could always rely on to take care of blockades and enemies means that you have to completely rethink how you go about traveling back to the gear. You've spent your whole playthrough with that sword, and you can't help but feel defenseless without it. It's truly wonderful, and it made me nostalgic for the swordless Zelda challenge runs you could do back in the NES days. So then, it's a shame that such a great moment is then followed up by a kinda bland final boss fight. Now, to be fair, it does seem like an obvious parody of cliché multi-phase final boss fights from other games, but the joke can only carry it so far. Combat was never Minit's strong suit as an experience, and while the fight is admittedly more involved in the second quest, I would have liked something different. The factory leading up to all of this is a great little box of puzzles, and I would have liked the final fight itself to expand on that. It would have been cool to teleport the player into a whole new final boss area where they need to solve a series of puzzles while dodging attacks or something. You know, beating the villain through brains, not brawn. At least you get to end the game by flushing your sword down the toilet right after. That makes up for it slightly. But even with the few shortcomings here and there, I would never tell someone to pass on this game. Quite the opposite, in fact. It's some of the greatest fun I've had playing a game so far in 2018. I've spent most of this video praising the gameplay, but I want to give a shout out to the game's tone and writing as well. Seriously, whoever wrote the dialogue deserves an award. The jokes kept coming and they all made me smile. The NPCs you meet come to life through expressive animation, and their personalities shine despite only having a couple lines of dialogue each. Minit is such a happy little bundle of joy that I can sincerely recommend to anyone. It's only $10 and it's well worth the price of admission. For what it's worth, it's the first game in years I got the Platinum Trophy for. Just be careful, because as soon as that clock starts ticking, I promise it'll be difficult to tear yourself away. Thank you for watching the first episode of Offbeat Gaming. If you have any suggestions for weird games that need more love, feel free to leave a comment below or tweet at me. If you want to hear me gush even more about Minit, check out episode 25 of my terrible disaster of an internet talk show known as We Are Finally Podcast. I'll link to it in the video description when it's available. I have a list of other weird games to look at in this series, but nothing to announce just yet. After all, I'm still running months behind on other video projects. They'll get done sooner or later, I promise. Hope you have a good night, and remember, snakes are friends.